I don't think we've ever met, but I feel like we have a bunch of mutual friends or at least mutual acquaintances.
Probably. I feel like the scene's pretty small, especially once you start to get into like consistent gigging or like writing for other people or whatever. I'm like, you're bound to meet someone you know already.
Where are you? Are you based in Philly?
Yeah, I moved here with, I don't know if you're familiar with Quarter, but I moved here with her back in January, and I was living on this like military base that I grew up on before then.
Wow.
And so I was like just tired of like anytime I had to tour, it was like a 2-hour ride to the airport. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. And Megan and I are like we're going long distance. So I was like, I'll just move to Philly.
What was the deal with the military base?
That's my upbringing. My dad is retired of like 21 years. He's a master sergeant, and then my stepdad just retired. So it's just Columbus has just been a part of the upbringing. Like even if you move, you always get sent back there every few years in the Army. So
okay, guys. So it was just where the family was.
Yeah, and it, like I ended up having a really strong support system, and it's either there or like Vegas, which we can get into later, like my two hometowns.
Different vibes.
Completely different vibes. Like Columbus is a great place to not have any distractions. And if I want to go party, I can go to Atlanta, but it's just enough to like, it's like having the energy to leave my house, which I normally don't.
You don't have to tell me. Yeah.
Yeah. Even in Philly, I'm like, I'm always like second guessing if I want to leave. But I think with Columbus, it's great because there's so much outdoor enjoyment to have. And it's inspiring in its own right. And having people around that watched you grow up, I think, especially as as my project was getting bigger, having people that watched me grow up from the beginning was actually, I think, important. So
that's actually really interesting. Do you mean in terms of kind of staying grounded and not losing track of what you're doing there?
Yeah, because I'd have like my background comes from like R&B and hip hop and writing for that. And I mean, I make rock records too. I make a lot of different stuff, and all my close friends know that the range is pretty broad. And so dance music just feels like I feel like for some friends, it feels like an oversimplification of what I do. But they all also understand that sometimes it's easier to market as a DJ or as a one person act than it is with a band or whatever. And as I'm starting to make that shift into dance music, a lot of my friends were like checking me as far as like, why are you making this song? Is it because you want to make this song, or is it because you know it's going to it's going to sustain your career? And it was like sometimes it was like not necessarily harmful, but it's like you already have enough going on in your own head, let alone like people that feel comfortable enough to tell you like, hey man, you're like losing the plot. At least for me, like having a friend, like a close old friend tell you something like that, I'm better able to evaluate that feedback, whether I agree with it or not. Right. If it's like a close friend, I can kind of take that in, first of all, without being offended or hurt, but then also kind of more rationally be like, yeah, that's a good piece of feedback, or you don't know what you're talking about, which I can also say to you because we're close friends. Right. Yeah. And understanding that boundary, because again, like the only other person that I know is like this, like doing it at this scale, if not better, is this guy named Lloyd Buchanan who plays with, he played with the Alabama Shakes, and now he plays for like Brittany Howard's solo project. And I had him play keys on a couple songs. He's a great guy, but like I didn't have any people to like, I don't know if compete's the right word, but like just keep you hungry and keep you excited. And I think that's where Vegas really comes into play, into its like importance in my project.
Yeah. And I definitely want to get into that in a second too. Just one last thing on what we're talking about here, which is that I think it's almost better that kind of feedback from a friend rather than like an artistic peer too. At least again, for me, sometimes if I send a song for feedback from like artistic peers or even more so if I'm wondering about a career choice or decision and asking someone else, it's weird. I mean, it is helpful. It's always great to have someone to talk to, but so often I find that advice I get from other people in the scene, it's so individualized, everybody's path,
right? Yeah.
That there's so many times when someone will give me a piece of advice, and even if it's smart and well-intentioned, I'm just like, but this just, I get that, but it has no relation to my path or kind of my intention of what I'm trying to do. I don't know if that resonates to you, but I find that more and more.
That is something that actually was a catalyst in like why I wrote my second album, but something that I think it's a problem that never quite goes away, but I think it is even worse now for people like where it's like mid-sized artists like myself or even smaller, where you can have an incredible work ethic, songwriting ability. Maybe you do put out content consistently. But there's so many other factors I don't necessarily want to call it luck, but there's just like, whether it be resources or attention from specific people that have the power to change your circumstances. Like there's all these other things that come into play that like, even now, I would say I have access to more people that are where I want to be. But the only thing I usually get from my conversations with them is to just like keep at it, like just keep working. But it's not like, it never really helps with them, like what mindset I need to have while I'm doing what I need to, or like connecting with the right people. It is, I get what you're saying, but
it's hard. I mean, have you ever been in the opposite chair where you're trying to give someone advice too? Because that, in a way, I get that too, because sometimes it's like all you can really do is be like, yeah, you're good. Keep trying. I don't, right. 'Cause in the same way that their advice doesn't always connect for me, it's like, I'm going to tell you something that isn't going to make any sense to you, Right.
Yeah. I think when people do ask me for advice, I think one thing is like, and maybe this is the case for people that I talk to, but like usually when a fan DMs me about like advice about something, I think they're like, a lot of the time they're asking for a really quick fix to a much more complex problem of like, again, putting in the time, your emotions, like the sort of maturity and focus that you're willing to put into your project. You can't really teach that. And like the best I can do is like, if you have like a specific production question, sure. Like I give tools away or samples or whatever all the time. But when it comes to developing your project, it's hard to explain to someone that it's like, hey, it's not just this tour that I did or this record that came out. It's the accumulation of over like 15 years of working that all added up to this. And it's like, it's not something you can teach somebody, but the best I can do usually is like, I'll try to direct it towards like skill sets or something, or like mindset where it's like how you kind of keep the demons at bay so you can focus on your work. But yeah, like it like, I'm glad you mentioned that, because now I'm like, wait, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like thinking about the people that I ask for advice and flipping it on its head.
Yeah. I had never really thought about that either. That just popped into my head. But
yeah, I'm like, wait, why don't I apply that to the people when I ask for advice?
Right. We're all floating on little individual islands.
And no one knows what they're doing.
That's also the case. Yeah. That's super weird too. When you meet, someone who, at least in my mind, is successful or made it or is where you want to be. And then you're like, oh, you don't have any idea either.
No. And I think like the closest that I ever experienced to that was, I would say like the Odesza tour, but that was like a team. That was like a lot of different people that knew what the hell they were doing, working together and knew how to work together and clearly had a long period of time to like adapt to what each other's needs are. Because I noticed that the guys had picked up a lot of people that they encountered when they did their first bus tour with Pretty Lights. And like a year later, they're picking up all the same people, all the same crew that they still work with like over a decade later. Yeah. So naturally, it's like not only learning together, but like establishing a foundation. So if something falls through, they're immediately thinking of how to fix it and hold each other accountable if they need to, without it being like you're going to lose your job or whatever. It's not like that. So
yeah, well, there's a good piece of advice in that, which is, you know, you encounter so many people in this line of work, but oftentimes for very short periods of time, just for a night or a couple hours, somebody introduces you at a party, whatever it is. And you do, at least for me, you can kind of immediately recognize like, oh, I like this person a lot in kind of a show. Yeah. There's something about this person. And I think that's a really good piece of advice, is to kind of keep those people, keep a little mental list of those people you've encountered along the way. And then when something comes along where, yeah, you might need some help, or you might need someone's expertise, or maybe things are growing, whatever it is, having those people, maintaining a relationship with those people so that when you need a larger group of people, when you need some help, you can really get the people who are going to be best for you, the best fit. That's very important. I think that's a really good piece of advice.
It's tough, yeah. But I think from that tour alone, I'm like, I have a list of people that I'm like, as soon as I get the cash flow, you. Especially when you realize like a lot of them, some people on a tour that big were like a part of a broader company, but a lot of the people on it were like independent contractors that you can just pick up. So yeah, it like I never imagined myself with that level of stage production, but it was a really good environment to spend a few months in, understanding like this can be a standard you work towards, and the kind of environment you create, not just for yourself, but for the team that's working with you, to put on such a like consistently good show that you can rely on and is pretty fail safe. So yeah, I think that was like a really healthy experience.
I should know this, but I don't. Were you always incorporating live elements, or did you start as like a pure DJ at some point?
No, in fact, like it's funny because I've played DJ sets for quite a while, and I've played big venues as a DJ for quite a while, but I wouldn't say I was any good at it until like last year, really.
Sure.
Because I grew up playing in like marching band and jazz band, and eventually made it into starting my own bands in high school. But I always had this interest in trying to navigate the hybrid set, especially because my first festival experience, I want to say, was Hard Summer back in like 2011. And I saw Little Dragon for the first time, and I'd never heard of them before. And I was like, I didn't know you're allowed to do that. Like,
that's like peak Little Dragon too.
Oh my God. It was mind blowing. And that was such a great year too. Like Mike Snow played. It was before Porter and Zed really like picked up. They hadn't released their albums yet.
Flyer. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like such a Bootsy Collins played. Like it was such a great blend of live and electronic in a way that was like just so inspiring, because I didn't realize you could combine these sorts of things and they had a place together. So I was always trying to figure that out. I think I had a really hard time with it. It's very complex, like trying to balance like how much risk you're willing to take.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I would like especially in Vegas, I would play like all the time, and I played like straight up acoustic sets where I'm just singing and playing guitar for a couple hours at some hotel. Or like there was one instance where I opened for like Elderbrook, I want to say in like 2017 or something. And I like triggered clips on one MIDI keyboard, and then I had my guitar and sang the entire time. And guitar and bass are my main things besides my voice. So I like I know I want that to be the focal point, but I'm always experimenting with how to make that flow, because I'm always worried, like, oh, if I'm not touching knobs, people are going to think I'm faking it or something.
Right.
Like,
Well, plus
so
I think
goofy.
in like festival environments and that sort of thing too, they make it hard to like do anything but DJ. I think if you show up with a bunch of instruments and you want a detailed sound check and all that, it's like, at least I know from some other friends who do the same thing, it's like sometimes it's just not even an option.
No, most of the time it's not. Which is why I've noticed, like, someone like a Ben Boomer, I think, really unlocked the cheat code where the live set fits in the carry-on, and so
Right.
it's just like keeping, or monolink, where like the live rig fits in the carry-on. It can just you don't even have to check it, which I think is, in my mind, I'm like, that's so risky, that's so scary. Like, how do you make sure nothing breaks? But I guess checking it's scary too. It's all risky and expensive. Like, most of the live touring that I've done, it's like you're not making a ton doing support spots. And I've been pretty lucky with that, but it was interesting seeing artists like Subtract or even Jai Wolf recently being like, it's not financially sustainable to tour as a live act right now unless you're really crushing it.
Yeah.
And even someone like Teed, I remember opening for him a while back, like last year, the year before, when he was doing a live set, and he's like, this is as minimal as I can get without feeling like I'm cheating anybody. And I was like, and he's like, it's just like, you kind of have to bite it and just be like, okay, I might go into debt doing this, or I'm going to have to play a ton of DJ sets to pay for it, maybe in rooms that I don't really want to.
Yeah.
But as long as I get this run, I feel like that's the approach people normally take. But even someone like Bonobo, he's like not bringing the band to the States anymore because it's so expensive.
Yeah, it's a weird time. And I think, you mentioned earlier the sort of like middle tier artists, which, is most of the artists in the scene realistically. And
right.
It's getting rough. I don't know. I don't know that I have a solution, because I think that is just mirroring larger issues in society,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's hard. I mean, not to say that there's plenty of people, whether it be like Spotify or whoever, to be mad at if you want, but like what we're seeing is affecting, I think, every industry. I watch a ton of video essays on YouTube, and it's been crazy seeing the same issues affect like book authors, movies, like every artistic medium is being affected by the kind of similar manifestations that are making it harder for you to just like put out your work and then go out and connect with people face to face to help like promote it. Because touring really, you can find a great song on Shuffler or whatever, and that's cool, but nothing makes someone connect to your story the way seeing them live does. Like, there's times where I don't even like a recording, and then I'll go see the band and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it.
Totally,
it happens all the time.
Totally. Yeah, no, it happens to me too. I've been, people who listen to this podcast know, because I can't stop talking about it, but I got really into like extreme metal in the last couple of years. And that's very much that kind of thing where I'll listen to a record and it's like just overwhelming and I can't connect. And then I go see the band live and it's completely like unlocks this thing. It's magical.
Yeah, I did. I listened to your podcast with Nikki Nair, and I thought it was really interesting how you guys were, I think you guys were talking about like how like heavier rock music nowadays is mixed in a completely different way.
Oh yeah.
And it got the gears turning, because I'm thinking of bands like Knock Loose or Idols, where it really feels like the drums and bass take precedence in a way that they just did not before. And vocals are still sitting where they need to, but it's like, instead of just a wall of guitars and voice, you're getting a full blend of everything. And it's like making things just really hit in a way that it didn't quite, like, I listened to a lot of indie rock growing up, but now I'm like, oh man, this is incredible. I feel like it's never been mixed better than this.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something to that. I remember this isn't exactly the same thing, but whenever Skrillex's old band like put out a new single, it was a few years back now, but he like produced it and mixed it, and it was sort of like the update of his old teenage band. It sounds like a Skrillex record. It hits so hard, but it's all
right.
live, and it was just one of those where I was like, oh man, like I don't know if it's good or bad for rock music, like to have that much
a loudness
power.
War.
Because
right.
Totally. Because if all the bands start going in that direction, it will definitely ruin it.
Absolutely. I think there's a time and a place. But I guess like for every band that's like something like Knock Loose, you also have like a Julian Baker or like a Phoebe Bridgers to like soften it up. I feel like a lot of the singer-songwriter landscape too is also like in a very interesting place where you're getting really authentic, vulnerable, dynamic songwriting and production in a way that like even the most recent Brittany Howard album, I was listening and I'm like, I did not grow up with guitar textures sounding like this. It's just like rich. You want to like bite into it. And it's really inspiring. And I think again, I think it comes from this aspect of like hip hop, pop, and electronic music getting so experimental, and the mix is just getting better and better and better. And I feel like the live artists are like, okay, well, we'll take some aspects of that and apply it to really incredible songwriting. And I mean, I can't really speak for everybody, but I feel like at least for me, it's like listening to all different styles of music has helped make my dance music better. And it does really feel like a conversation collectively for all of us as artists to like listen to each other, listen to music we don't play, and having that, like allowing that to influence our decisions creatively.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's when it's always the best. I think when music gets sealed off in little bubbles, little echo chambers, like there's some fun to that in the short term when you can see like a little micro scene just start exploding, like cells dividing. But after a while, it just gets incestuous and there's no new ideas. And yeah, I'm completely with you. And it actually makes me want to talk about your Floating Worlds album, because I was listening to it earlier this morning, and there's a lot I like about it. But one thing I noticed and wrote down is I felt like there was a really tight, like sonic palette to it in terms of like the synths you were using, the particular sounds you were choosing, even down to like the way you were mixing your vocals. And just because we were just talking about it, like, was any of that inspired by something you were hearing, or was any of that like a conscious choice to be like, this is the sonic lane I want for this album?
It's kind of tricky because I feel like when I wrote most of that album back in December, I have like a tendency to like, if I'm going to sit down and do a project, that's like all I do. And I'll write a lot of music in a really short period of time, but I try to work in phases now. So for this record, I wrote like 20 songs. And I actually wasn't listening to any music at all. I was reading mainly a lot of books that fit into a specific theme of existentialism and like being in solitude and like just learning to not be the center of everything and kind of just like observing things for what they are. And if I was listening to music, it was like really ambient stuff.
Sure.
And because I wanted what was coming out to just be what was happening. Now, I guess to your point though, and I think this is very valid advice for anyone trying to make a long form project like an album, is writing more than you need to. And like I was writing every day, 1 or 2 songs, and you eventually pick up on synths you like, processing that you like, and you start to repeat these things. And you'll have so much to choose from that all kind of live in the same world from a certain time period. It's all going to tie together in some way because it's all reflective of something you're experiencing in that moment. And then you can always go back and cut the fat. You can always go back and take away what doesn't sit right. And going back to your like point about like old friends, but like I kind of had my old friends pick the track listing, and I had my girlfriend pick the track listing and what stood out to them, because they don't have any skin in the game. It doesn't matter, but just like what resonated. And I like took a month off and then went back and actually refined things. But I think with the vocal processing, I remember at the end of the tour last year, I was talking to this guy, Kyle, who used to be the A&R at Foreign Family. And he was trying to challenge me with like my internal conviction, I guess, that, oh, my vocals are the only thing that make me stand out as an electronic act. And he's like, well, I like your productions too. So like, what if you didn't have that? And so instead of like going for a more songwriter approach like I normally do, I was like, let me just record vocals for the sake of treating it like a sample or a synth. That's why a lot of my vocals sound the way they do on there. I would sing things that I would still try to write lyrics that fit a certain theme, but I wasn't trying to be poetic in any way, except for like one song. But that one song, Warm to the Touch, was written like 2 years ago. And that's the only one that was written before I locked in. So,
right. Yeah.
I will say there's a lot of like 2015 Subtract influence in there, like his debut, Bonobo, with a little more like, I feel like with Contra, I was trying to copy Bonobo, but I didn't understand like how to layer correctly without overdoing it.
Right.
And so like in this case, I'm like, no, I want to take from these influences, but then keep it as simple as possible. And I would say like, if there were any artists that I could pull from outside of electronic music, I'd say someone like Thames, who makes like Afrobeat. I listen to her like all the time. I think she has some of the most, like, every line she sings feels like the hook. I don't know how else to explain it, but like every line she sings just feels like the catchiest thing you've ever heard. Again, going back to this, like with Afrobeats, you also have this like plucky, like call and response. Everything's kind of talking to each other, and it's really simple, but everything has its place and is doing what it needs to. And so I was trying to approach the album that way, where I want everything to have a specific purpose other than just like, I'm trying to layer a lot so people think that I'm a complex, thoughtful producer, because it doesn't work and it sucks to mix on your own. So yeah.
Yeah, which is another, I think, common trope that like early producers fall into. I definitely did, of like more layers means you're a better producer, you know?
Right. Like, oh, if I have like 200 tracks in the project, I must be like big brain 5D chess producer. Yeah, and it's just like, just like overgrown skull. But I think as you progress, and I have met producers that are like, no, less is less. Like you need to like, layers are important, but I think those come from people that understand sound design and drum design. And so like when they layer, it's with such specific intention, and they're like painters at that point, where they understand how things are supposed to blend together, how to give them depth. They'll listen to a song and immediately be like, this sounds dull, or it sounds too bright, or whatever, and understand how to work and layer with that in mind, which most people, it's one of those things you can't teach.
Yeah.
Like you can't teach someone how to use a compressor. You can't teach them how to like layer with intention. It's something that you kind of have to learn through finishing more ideas.
Absolutely. And I think the people who are really good at it also find doing that very fun, the like painting small details part of it, which not everybody does. It's not my favorite thing in the world. But again, it's sort of that, I guess we're going back to that idea again of like whose advice is, valid, or who do you listen to, where it's like, if it works for them, that's amazing. And it's like, I can be a huge fan of that and am a huge fan of that. But then if someone who doesn't enjoy it is trying to do it kind of just as an obligation to check a box to, this is what a good producer needs to do, that's also going to come through in the music, I think.
Yeah, it absolutely shows in your work. I think like I do appreciate my first album for what it is, but I'll listen back and I'm like, this would be so much better if you weren't trying to flex so hard. If you weren't trying to like I wrote that album in a really short period of time. I spent way too much time mixing it, way too much time, way too many passes on it. And I, to this day, I feel like I drained the life out of really good ideas. And so with this one, like my most recent single, If You Need Me, like that is like the second draft. And I would try to mix it and then show it to friends and they're like, I like the old one.
Right.
And so like, I did not spend nearly as much time mixing. I just tried to make sure I like write with the intention of giving things space, not either like in time, like not things not playing at the same time, or in frequency where things aren't like, not everything is playing in the midsection or in the highs, like giving things physical space. And then when it's time to mix, it's like nowhere near as difficult to do. It's like a skill that I would say I picked up from like listening to a lot of like organic house, even though I don't really get into it. I don't go to like shows or anything, but it's like whenever I see a video of someone like Jonas Rasmussen from Kiasmos like talk about production, he approaches it like that, where it's like just make sure that what you do right has its shine, it's doing its job. Because the more you try to add in, the more you have to like try to make it fit. And it can completely take away from the actual creative process. Or make sure you finish a song. And
yeah,
like, even if it means like not going through the whole track and taking out all the clicks and pops in my vocal, like sometimes I skip out on doing that. And like, I know that sounds like insane, but a lot of the time people don't notice, or it adds character to the song. It makes it feel real.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I can't say it's like a solution for everything, but it really does. It is a really great thing, I think, for me. Like, it's been liberating and helps me finish more music quickly. So.
Well, and I liked, this is sort of a tangent off of that, but I thought it was really interesting what you were saying, that you were reading a lot of similarly themed books around the time and kind of giving like a different part of your life and a different part of your brain that sort of consistency while you were writing music. I think it's really interesting. It's really smart as far as, because I think the idea of like writing an album can be daunting. I think it's hard to make a body of work feel cohesive and consistent just in general. And I really like the idea that making something else in your life cohesive and consistent and kind of like diving into a related but separate interest can then kind of bring that quality out of the work that you're doing creatively. I just never really thought about it like that, but it's really interesting. I like that a lot.
It was really helpful. I like before I started the album, I was getting into this book called House of Leaves that I would never really recommend to anybody. It's such a workout, but it's about this house that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And this family moves into it so that they can be closer together. But the house, it like turns itself into a labyrinth that you can just get lost in. And it's actually really horrifying. And I feel like it's very representative of the emotional distance between everyone in the house. It's literally like physically a difficult book to read. Like the author like deliberately puts words over each other or like writes them in it's so much work. But I was recommended it where it's like, oh, if you want to get into like some cool, like existential, like horror, like here you go. And, I like it, that's what like kicked off a lot of, it like got my reading, kind of itch back. 'Cause I used to read a lot as a kid. But then I read Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, and that's what made me think to work in phases and to leave things alone. Like, come up with the idea, don't listen, like, at all costs. Don't listen unless you are planning on working on it. But then I read at the Existentialist Cafe a few James Baldwin books, this book called Kusamakura, and this book, Letters to a Young Poet. And all of them kind of explore a few things where it's like yes, your circumstances do define a very specific like level of your life that some people never overcome. Like some people never really arrive at a better destination than where they're at. But the way you perceive your reality and yourself can constantly shift in the moment. Like it can constantly be changing and determined by you. That is something you have control over, if not anything else. And that's like really hard to say, considering like, especially now where like a lot of people are like being kind of like forced to suffer.
Yeah.
But I think as like, especially like living in America, it's like, I think I can get through this if I just kind of shift my attitude a little bit and my perception of the value of my work and how other people think of me and what my place is and contribution is to the environment around me. And these books kind of helped me dial into a sense of solitude that I really needed, like really bad. And I was like not keeping up with social media at all. And I kind of felt bad because I'm like, oh man, like I just went on this big tour. Am I like flopping right now? But then I'm like, I don't think I would have been able to finish music if I wasn't completely tuned out, because I needed to just fully commit to enjoying these stories. They made me feel a lot less alone. And James Baldwin says that like, if you ever feel alone, just go read. And it really, it helps so much because you realize like what you're experiencing is not only something that we all might be going through, but because of that, there's probably a way for you to cope with it. And
I love
that's
that.
kind of what a lot of these books were helping me do, where it's like, as an artist, you kind of have to go through these transformative experiences. It's a lot of doubt. It's a lot of frustration because it's so much unknown territory. You don't know what's going to happen, even when things are going really good. And when you're allowing yourself to release that sort of desire to have to know, it leaves you a lot of room to just be like, okay, well then what am I doing now? I might have these desires in the back of my mind, but what am I actively doing right now that brings me fulfillment and joy and makes me feel like I'm actively working towards those things so that they eventually show up because I put the energy into it. That's kind of what the album is about in a way. Floating Worlds is a translation from ukiyo, which I'm probably butchering. It's a Japanese word that means like sorrowful world or like flaky, unreliable world.
Okay.
And it's basically just this the cycle of life and death and suffering that Buddhist monks were trying to break out of. And I feel like the album was a way for me to explore ideas that I was trying to do in Contra, but with a much more hopeful resolve of like, again, I'm going to choose joy and find these small things that help me feel like I am enough to keep going. Because with Contra, it ends in like with the song Push, that's like everything is meaningless. I feel meaningless even when I'm achieving my I'm doing it. I'm touring globally. I'm suffering internally still. I'm so unhappy. I'm unhappy. I don't like where I am. I don't like the people I'm around. Like why did I do all of this? And like really confronting that, especially because I'd stopped drinking like a year and a half ago. And I think doing that made it even harder for me to tolerate the things that I was tolerating just so that I could continue to grow my project. I was like, I can't do this. I don't want to, like, I'm seeing people that are even at the best of this circumstance that I'm currently in, these people are still really unhappy. And I don't want that. I don't want to be sad about the same things. I don't want to feel underappreciated or alone or frustrated that like thinking no one cares about me despite putting out great work. Like, and so I kind of just had to take a beat and be like, well, what am I doing this for exactly? If it's not for self-exploration and hopefully like as I'm sharing the album, being able to kind of get other people to question that for themselves. And it's like, if we can kind of hold hands through it and experience it together, then I would love to be that person. And that's kind of like all I really have to offer with this project.
I mean, that I connect to a lot of what you're talking about. It's very cool to be able to put that kind of realization into a piece of work. I'm always kind of obsessed with the idea that there's some impossibility to putting an individual experience into a piece of music or art that's supposed to be kind of this universal feeling. Like, I think that's such a crazy alchemy that's so hard to do. But the way you're talking about is so holistic that, and I think, again, the album is, sonically is cohesive and really does sort of nail a pretty specific mood that, yeah, I don't know. It's a really cool way to think about putting something together. I mean, did you, like, all those feelings coming off the Odesza tour, did it really feel like you, or I guess I should just say, like, what was the feeling? Was it burnt out? Was it overwhelmed? Was it like a loss of direction or drive?
Yeah. Well, to clarify, the Odesza tour was actually like what kind of got me out of a lot of despair that I was feeling.
Okay, gotcha.
Because I parted with the label I was with originally like that summer and like pretty much lost a lot. Like I wasn't with my old team anymore. It was all happening at once. And the Odesza tour was this experience where I got to see that there is a very healthy way to go about this. And there are people that can in this industry that care about your safety and your well-being and that you can be vulnerable with. Of course, after that tour, yeah, it's like the post-festival blues. Like when you come back home from like a Bonnaroo or something, you're like, man, I got to deal with like actual living, like, damn. And that aspect, like, especially because I'm like, wait, I don't have management. I don't have a team. Like, how do I go about things that I was used to doing for the past 4 years with help? How do I start to approach it? And I got on a call with Toki Monsta, and she was like, I'll help you get kind of situated, like as far as like pointing you in the right direction with people you can talk to. But she's like, but you're gonna have to work. Like you need to go buckle down and just make some music. And I was like literally, that's the only thing you could possibly do in this situation is go write some songs, because I didn't have any releases lined up. So it's like, just go write some music. And that process is always so revealing. Again, it's like, if you can get yourself to sit with your thoughts, like really sit with whatever your brain is trying to tell you. And it's not fantastic. You, especially like, I feel like musicians were like hyper aware of our surroundings and things we may or may not like about ourselves or this industry or working. Like there's just so many things to get really bogged down in and spiral in. But I think through music, you can sort of like, again, it's like kind of shifting all of that energy into your music, into your work. And it isn't a tangible solution really, but the expression itself is like extremely therapeutic. And like, again, I do feel like I came across a lot more answers of the kind of person I want to be once I finish this album. But like, that's not to say I still don't get pissy and have a bad attitude all the time, or like,
of course,
still feel like all grumpy, like, man, the music industry is so like unfair, man. And then I'll still get that way, but
which is true.
It's just,
like that is also
true. It's true. Yeah, it's because it's true. But like, it's just like my letting the unfairness be a reflection of who I am as a person and how I see myself, and not being able to love myself because I'm like, my surroundings aren't treating me right. So maybe I'm just not worth that. and like getting out of that is really hard. But I think writing helped a lot, and spending some time alone really helped a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Being able to, I still struggle with this all the time, but being able to separate your identity as an artist, a project, a musician from your actual identity as just like a human being existing in the world, that it's so important and it's so hard to do.
Yeah, I feel like that's just like an American issue where like your health insurance is tied to your work. Like,
yeah, that's true too.
It feels like impossible because everything, like, it's not even just like, oh, having a cool, successful job. It's like, I need this to sustain me. And I feel like a lot of artists nowadays,
yeah,
it is. And I feel like plenty of artists are getting part-time jobs just so that they can actually enjoy making music and touring and all that, and not feeling like, wow, even if I get to tour nationally or globally, I'm not like just completely in the red, like unrecoverably in the red.
100%. Yeah. And I think you're right too, that's maybe if it isn't becoming more common, it's at least coming more out into the open. I think people are less afraid to like just show it, not trying to hide it, you know?
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's no shame in it at all.
No.
Like I know like plenty of musicians are where they'll be like teachers, or they have like office jobs that allow them to have the weekends off so they can go do what they need to do. But it's even just having that contrast of a world that just doesn't care about music like that can be really refreshing. But yeah, I don't have anything else.
No, I'm right there with you. Maybe we should work backwards here. I've been all over the place just because I'm having fun talking to you. But you were talking about growing up. Did you actually grow up in Columbus?
For the most part.
And sorry, for anyone listening, this is Columbus, Georgia that we're talking about?
Right, not Ohio. Okay. That's where I've spent the most time. I lived in Texas, like in El Paso. I lived in upstate New York, lived in Puerto Rico, lived in Belgium, lived in Korea, lived in Baltimore, Maryland.
Is this all because of the military thing, moving around this much?
Yeah. And once my dad retired, he was still working as like a federal employee. So I just would, if he went to a cool place, I would go with him. Like he got sent to Belgium for a while and I was like 19 and I'm like, I'm going there.
Nice. What was it like when you're younger, when you're like a littler kid moving around that much? Was it fun? Was it disorienting? Like, how do you think about how that affected your development, good or bad?
Yeah, I've actually been talking about this with my partner quite a bit lately because I feel like moving around so much made me feel like I was built for touring. Like when I was on a tour bus for 2 months, waking up in different places or whatever, like I loved it so much. I was like, this is what I was made for. But I think, and I think it's given me a lot of like charisma, or if you put me in a place where I got to go make friends, I'm usually pretty decent at it, or just like fitting where I need to as much as I need to. But at the same time, when you're so used to moving every year or two, you might make friends, but you also know like, hey, we're going to leave. I'm probably not going to stay in touch. And just like learning to be cool with that at a really young age. And I think as an adult, like why that's been harmful is that like, if I feel like a situation is causing me stress, or I'm like, this person is actually like really bogging me down, or like they flat out, like if you cross me, you literally won't hear from me again. Like I will disappear off the face of the earth. You never met me. And I will have no problem doing that to a fault. Like it's such a problem.
Like just avoiding the problem instead of dealing with it.
Yeah. Or like my girl's making fun of me because I'm like, I don't have any pictures of people I've dated in the past. I just delete all of it. I just like wipe it clean from my memory. Like, I don't remember what these people look like. Like it's such a, which is funny because she's like an archivist. She has like photos and videos and audio of as much of her life as she possibly can. She's the opposite of me. But yeah, I feel like it's given me this ability to adapt, but at the same time, it's given me it's like so easy for me to completely let go of something that is like, if it feels like it's causing me some tension in a way that I'm like, do I want to learn from this? No.
Yeah.
I'm out. Bye.
Right.
Which I think with the music industry, it's really tricky because like, I'm also like kind of, I can be brutally honest or like just straight up with people when you're not supposed to,
Sure.
or like, I'll just say something where I'm like, you know, that this isn't the person that you need to be straight up with. And I don't necessarily think that's right, but I'm sure it would have saved me a lot of headache to know the difference, or like just knowing like, yes, you are like, you should stand up for yourself. You should be, you should understand your values, but you can also keep that shit to yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
So just kind of knowing that line. And that's something I'm learning now.
Was it big family, brothers and sisters?
No, I have one brother. So I'm the oldest. So like super tight family. And, I mean, I didn't spend a lot of time with my dad just because he got deployed a ton when I was growing up. But I think as I got older and I was old enough to choose where I would go and hang with him more. And when we did hang, my dad and I kicked it a lot. It was great.
The music thing, is there any like musical background in your family? Anybody else play anything? Bands, anything?
No, it made my job so much harder to get into. It's funny because my mom would put me into piano lessons or like violin or whatever when I was like 8. So I've been learning music my entire life. And then when I was like, hey, Mom, I want to do this as a career, she's like, ew, no, what do you mean?
Yeah. She's like, shit, it backfired.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is literally like what you've trained me for. But yeah, my dad has always been really supportive, but he's also just a really easygoing dude for the most part. My mom has mellowed out a lot because I grew up in a Catholic Hispanic family. So it's just like our kids need to be the absolute best at what they do and need to have good grades and like no drugs and only talk to God and all this stuff. And
right.
And I think just like as I got older, there's still aspects of my like Christian upbringing that I think is valuable, but it's like as I got older, I just started to separate more and more from what my family's expectations were of me. And like my mom never saw me play until I did like 2 nights at Red Rocks with Above and Beyond. And that was like her first time ever seeing me. Wow. And she was like, oh, this is what you've been working on. And I was like, yes.
That's you got to wonder what she was picturing, you know?
Right. And same with my dad. My dad had never seen me play aside from like guitar and singing in the home. He'd never seen me play a show until I did, I want to say it was like West Palm with Odesza. And he's like, wow, this is so much fun. Like, this is what you were doing. And I'm like, yes.
Oh man, I read that some of your early like band experience was like worship bands, like Christian bands.
Yeah, I learned how to play bass and guitar like when I was like 13-ish is when I started playing, and I would do a lot of like Death Cab for Cutie, John Mayer, because it was hard. I was like, these songs are just tricky, so I want to try it.
Yeah.
But playing in church is what taught me how to communicate with a band without speaking. And like the commitment to rehearsal and commitment to like things just not being about you, and like how that helps, how you contribute to a greater picture of and flow of a show. Learned most of that in church. And even like I had Ableton templates that I would take from like church programming videos.
Oh, wow.
Because I feel like if anyone knows how to like program a show, it's like Christian mega churches. They like know how to get a show running really smooth.
No question.
And sounding good. and they give out those templates for free. So I was like, let me go see what's going on over here. And it's been very helpful.
When did you or how early were you getting into production and getting interested in that side of it?
I was recording myself when I was like 15. I picked up a Cakewalk from Best Buy so I could record guitars and my vocals. And that's like mainly what I was doing. I didn't like try to program drums or anything. I would have to go to a friend's house to record a band, which is what I did. I didn't get into electronic production until I was about like 19 or 20, maybe younger than that, but hardly. I had a friend at the time who was really like, he was just getting started with Ableton. He was a huge fan of like Big Room, was listening to like Swedish House and Avicii and all that. And he's like, this is Ableton. And I'm like, that looks horrifying. Tell me more. And I like got a cracked version of my dad's like military issued laptop.
Nice.
I'm sure it's laying around the house somewhere, but that's like, I would, and what's funny is I use that and I would still try to write live music. Like I was like, oh wait, there's a whole pack of, you can do strings in this. So I would write like orchestral arrangements and something that I feel like not a lot of people talk about is like when you are a trained musician, converting those skills into being a good producer is actually really, really hard.
Yeah, it's kind of like two separate but very related skills.
Right. Like it might help you with your creative flow, but like knowing when to stop or knowing when to quit, like just let something live and breathe, or like even sample selection or sound selection. Yeah. Like that is a completely different art form that you can't just teach. It's something that you kind of just have to learn over time. And so that was, I think, a bigger learning curve than like something like just writing, like just trying to get ideas across or putting an arrangement was pretty easy from the start. But it was like, how do I use a compressor? How do I like make sure that everything's sitting and playing nice together? And that took me a really long time.
So when you're like 19, 20, just starting to play with all this stuff, was it a thought that music was something you wanted to pursue professionally at that point?
Yeah, I had that feeling because I was like in high school, I was like, oh, I'm going to be in a band. I'm going to be the next Paramore. Like really just so obsessed with bands at the time. And I really wanted that to be my life. And I'm kind of grateful it didn't kick off really, because I think anytime that because I always feel like I've had the skill set. I've always been a pretty skilled songwriter. I've always been really good at finishing my ideas. And I've always been pretty friendly and charismatic and like know how to talk to people. But I always think like, yo, if this had happened any sooner, I would have like, who knows what would have happened to me? Because like, like, especially like when I was first making electronic music, I was also partying and like so irresponsibly in a way that like is not me in any way now. And if I was partying the way I was like on a bus tour, like, oh no, no.
Yeah. Yeah. That can go south.
It can go so south. And even with like not drinking, I'm like, wow, it's so much easier to manage your emotions, but also at the same time, like to understand them, like to understand why you might be feeling some type of way about something happening. It might be very like blatantly obvious, but at least it's easier to control your reaction to it. So I think when you drink, it's like things can just get out of hand really quickly, and you'll think the next day, like, what happened? Like any sensible person would have completely avoided that. And
yeah. It's like the best thing I ever heard about being drunk. I don't even remember. I think it was just a friend who said it. Maybe it's some famous quote, but it's like trying to talk when you're sober, trying to talk to somebody who's drunk is like trying to talk to somebody who's underwater. And that's exactly what it is it's just this other state of being when you're in it. If you're the person under the water, that's just how you move because you're under the water, and that's kind of how it works down there. But for anyone else watching it, it's like, what the fuck are they doing?
What is that?
Yeah.
Right. I feel like that's even more prevalent with like psychedelics or something, where it's like, it's so the difference in perspective is so, it's like palpable.
Yeah.
Like just how difficult it could be to communicate or even perceive things at the same level, or like we have a same mutual understanding of something in front of us. It's really tricky, but yeah, I think like not engaging in stuff nearly as much. I would say like not smoking anymore was really hard. I used to smoke a lot of weed. It was so bad up until like this year. I'd stopped in January and I was having the worst nightmares for months. It was really bad. But I had to realize, I'm like, how am I handling my anxiety or ADHD or like things that I've just dealt with by smoking and putting it off? Like now I'm actually having to confront these feelings or thoughts, or like going back to like not feeling worth, I think like success or whatever, like trying to confront that without the crutch was a learning experience. I had to relearn how to make music. So
I believe it. I mean, that almost sounds like another example of kind of the, avoiding the tough thing when you're able to just kind of sidestep it with, some weed or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. I feel like it was just I thought it was benefiting me because I'm like, oh, if I'm not smoking, then, I'm usually too much energy for people, or I can be overbearing. So like it's best for everybody. But I think now I'm like, dude, if you don't want to put up with it, like that's not my problem. I'll be nice, but like I'm not going to try and like dim my energy or anything just to fit what the expectation is of something. I'm just not being so hard on myself about it. And I feel like in turn, that's actually like helped how I interact with people.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes total logical sense. If you can be a little softer to yourself, probably, that will translate to you being softer in your daily life in general.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, man. Getting older, I feel like is like the best lesson.
I mean, it's one of those things. I know exactly what you mean. And I mean, I probably talk about getting older too much on this podcast, but it is one of those things where each year, you realize that like last year you didn't really know as much as you thought. And now you know a little more. And I think that's kind of how it is like, you get to the end of your life and you can kind of see it all and then you die. It's like that's the irony of it.
That made me think of this. There was one stop. I want to say we were going to play Palm Springs, and the one of the tour managers took like the whole crew to this thing called the Integratron, and it's like out by like where they do Coachella. It's like this meditative dome thing that a guy made to make humans live longer, because he was like, if humans live longer, then they can learn to not be so shitty. And I'm like, that's not how it works, but okay.
Great. I love the thinking. Like, it's such a funny idea to have that thought and then to also be like, and I have the solution. It's this dome.
Yeah. And then built it. And like, that place is so fascinating. I want to go back really bad because we did a sound bath in it. And I don't know if you've ever like heard of like how it functions, but like someone from across the room when they're talking will sound like they're inside your head, but then you can't really hear the people right next to you. And so like you lay on these mats and this woman will do a sort of guided sound bath situation, and it's otherwise quiet. And the sound will travel, like you feel it rushing through your body as it's like circling the room.
Wow.
And it's like, as someone who like, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm like, I'm not really like, I don't really think about it too much. I'm just like, let's just tune in and let it ride. I was like crying midway through it. I was just crying my eyes out. But then like, I felt bad because my partner, Megan, like noticed that someone was snoring, and it sounded like it was snoring like in her head. So she's like, I need to go back because I didn't get anything from it.
That's so funny.
Such an insane place.
Wow. I mean, did you leave feeling like it had any kind of therapeutic? Did you feel different? Did you have a different perspective?
It puts you into a deep meditative state. And again, I'm not like, I don't believe in any sort of specific entity, but I know that when you kind of let yourself get into that, like a really deep level of meditation, you don't even have to take anything. You just kind of feel kind of weird. It's like a weird feeling. Like I don't know how to describe it really, other than like just being really in tune with the present moment. I feel like if it were church, they'd be like, it's the Holy Spirit. I'm like, dude, I think you're just kind of really enjoying the moment without wanting to change it. It's like that, where you're feeling so in tune with it. And I think it works because it's like you have no other obligations. Just like sit here and let the sounds kind of wash over you. And it's such a unique room. And so when I got out of it, I was like, I feel really calm. I feel like I want to call my mom and like kiss on everybody and just be like, you're
that
so important
great.
to me.
Yeah.
It was great.
I mean, that makes me think about, sorry, not to cut you off, but just the idea that, and this is not something I came up with. It's, I think, an older idea, but it's like, I'm sort of the same as you. I've become probably more spiritual as I've gotten older. I wasn't religious really at all when I was younger, and I'm still not, but I'm much more open to the idea of spirituality now. And I think it's kind of that thing that like all major religions to me, it's like, yeah, they're sort of trying to do the same thing, but it's like they're doing it the most wrong. You know, like it's like they're sort of the farthest off the mark, where it's like, yeah, I think the original idea behind religion in general is probably what you and I are talking about. It's the same idea of like, yeah, something's going on here. You can kind of tune into it. There's bigger things at play that maybe we don't understand. But then, yeah, the like codifying it into structured religion kind of gets further and further away from the point to me.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite like little spiritual books that it itself is like, it's not a religion, but I'm like, it's definitely getting there. But it's the Tao Te Ching, which is, I would say, like if you're into like Buddhism or Hinduism, it's kind of in that, but even more. I feel like it's a religion for people who are retired and have money, because the whole point is like, it's like this doing and not doing. Like basically you just have to observe things for what they are, try your best and let it go. Like it's such a passive, and it even describes itself as like a feminine, like just submission to your surroundings in a way, which I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that way that's phrased, but it doesn't tell you, there's no dogma that you get from like something like Catholicism, where like, even when I was at the deepest point of my faith as a Christian, it was, it gave me a similar feeling of like when I do a meditation or something like that, where it's just like feeling fully immersed and allowing your surroundings to be what they are. I'm not trying to put a name to it. I'm not trying to put a name to my emotions or anything. But I think what's tricky is that there's just so many layers to the human existence. Like, yes, there's just being, but then you have your circumstances, you have kind of things that work against you. And the more of a minority you are, it kind of just stacks up. You have intersectionality that you have to deal with. And I ended up like kind of dipping out, because as I was realizing that I'm queer, I'm like, it's getting tricky to navigate how I fit into this space, and trying to figure it out is actually breaking my heart. So I'm just not going to participate in it.
How old were you approximately when you were figuring this out?
I mean, Megan and I joke about this. I've known I was gay since I was like 6 or 7, maybe younger. I knew, but as far as like feeling like I can't lie to myself anymore about it, probably like 16. And even then I didn't come out until I was like 22. So,
well, I can imagine in a heavily Christian household, and
yeah. And I grew up in the South. Like, it's just not, there's plenty of gay guys, but there's not necessarily like a lot of like lesbian women that you come across.
Oh, that's an interesting, I never thought about that.
That's at least something that I noticed about Columbus. Up until recently, I feel like you have so many more different types of people embracing themselves now, but I didn't really have a lot of queer role models or people that are like living healthy relationships. And most of what I would see would be like online, like Tumblr girls and like YouTube vloggers or something, like looking happy and cute and sweet. And I'm like, that's so surface level. But it also made me realize, I'm like, but that sounds more appealing than like trying to get married to a guy and have kids and like be a housewife, which is funny because now I'm like dating a girl and still doing housewife things. Like I'm still cooking and doing the laundry and all that. But like,
I was thinking about this idea the other day too, that like, and I'm curious your reflections on it, because don't really have any authority to talk about it, but it's the idea that like the electronic music, like the community in general, theoretically is like a pretty open, accepting fan base. And like, as music communities go, maybe one of the better ones for like accepting people as who they are and being open to people of all different types, races, shapes, whatever. But then as performers, I don't know that it's that accepting.
You don't get the same grace. You don't.
Yeah.
It's
would you agree?
That, like,
I mean, that was just something that occurred to me the other day.
Yeah. It's not something I realized until I was putting out my first album, like the acceptance and joy and like, oh, just come hang out with our group. You can't find your friends, come hang with us. Or like just that whole, the like plur sentiment I just feel this way about all genres of music. I think it's just as bad, if not worse, in hip hop and pop because the demographic is so big. But with dance music, it's this weird thing where like, I don't think people realize just how prevalent like racism and misogyny run like rampant. It's like so rampant, and like I would get dogged on so much about everything that I was doing. And then if someone else did it, that was a guy or like, especially a white dude, it was like, no one bats an eye. And I was like, and I had to process that. Like, okay, is it because I'm not as big of an artist, or is it like, what is it exactly? And nowadays I try to tune it out the best I can, but like, I think people just assume, like, to go beyond race or sexual preference or whatever. Like, I think people, like the average day-to-day listener, looks at someone who's growing as a creative, and the more you're succeeding, the less they feel like they can treat you like a person. Like, the more you're growing as an entertainer, the more people feel like they can treat you like a product or something to just be consumed and thrown away. And so they lack respect for your dignity or just like the time that you put into things. Like it's like, yes, I feel like racism and misogyny and all these other things are a factor, but like it's a general sentiment of like people being extremely rude to artists because they think, oh, you've obtained this thing that in my mind, you're better or bigger or something than me, when I'm like, brother, you have health insurance, you work an office job, and you have things I don't.
Yeah.
So like you have like a stable job and income and all these other things that like, yes, I get to go play a show, but that doesn't mean that I'm any better or living better or anything. It's just not the case, especially now. But I think we would have a lot to gain in learning, like, not to say we can't critique music. I think it's so important and fun, but like understanding how to do that in a way that helps people improve rather than just like absolutely dogpiling on people because it's not what you want, especially when there's so much music. If it bothers you, just shut it off and go listen to something else. Or like I'll get complaints about like, why is OLAN opening? And I'm like, just show up later. Just show up after. Show up after my set. I'm already pulling up. Show up after the set.
Yeah, and there's this kind of touches on something we were talking about earlier too, which is like homogeneity in a music scene, which for me, like I grew up kind of like you in a way, like listening to all different kinds of things, and I would go to different kinds of shows, and even, you know, like music festivals, there would be mixed bills. Tours, I feel like, used to be a bit more of a mix than they are now in sort of the era of like really commercialized US dance music. And so for me, it just seems natural and like exciting to have a bunch of different stuff on the same bill in the same night. But then I have sort of had to come to the realization that there is a generation or a group of people, whatever it is, that don't agree with that. And I don't always know how to really navigate that.
Right. I think it does help to be aware of it, like learning early on as my project was starting to pick up that like there's going to be a lot of people that just simply don't like me because I'm not making very standard, predictable music that they're used to. They want to be fed a certain thing. That's not what I'm delivering. But I'm here. And that alone can make people upset for whatever reason. I don't understand it, but you can't talk people off of that, especially if you're not close to them and they don't want to be close to you.
Yeah.
And that's just been something that I've had to learn how to deal with. And I think Twitter is a great example. Like I've seen so many women like with way more going for them than I do, having to still deal with like, I'm doubting myself because of the kind of things that strangers are saying to me online, because people don't respect boundaries or respect me, or don't think I deserve boundaries because I'm famous or whatever. And it's such a bizarre thing that I really feel like we have to sort of learn collectively, because it's like if you wouldn't say it to someone in person, like try to keep it offline if you can, or if you're going to mention something like, or give your opinion that might be negative or something, like there's a way to word it so that it's constructive and helps someone actually like take it into account. Like, oh, I can grow from that. I can take it or not and adjust what I'm doing so that I'm a better artist and appeal to more people. It's a balance, but
yeah, I think there's ways to like lead with, you know, this is basic stuff, but leading with kindness, leading with support. If you put that in front, then I think any, you know, actual criticism you have is, of course, going to be much more well received. But it's also, again, it's like a symptom of the larger sickness we have with online culture and social media in this era in general, where, you know, a lot of times people are not posting because they want to give sincere criticism. You know, it's right for any number of other bad impulses.
And I'm not to say I'm not guilty of like just like hate watching stuff for fun.
Oh, of course.
And like I do it all the time. I'm such a hater. But like, I think as I've gotten older, it's really this thing where like I can have my critique on something. And if anything, like direct it inwards. Like, what do I not like about this so much? Why is it rubbing me the wrong way?
It's all projection.
So bad.
It's all projection.
Then like, really though, it really can be. And whether it be like something that my partner and I talk about a lot is like something like comparing yourself to another artist. Like, is it because you are jealous, or is it because you are upset at how the system is currently operating and how it tends to favor people that might be less knowledgeable than you or don't have as much experience, but are better at other things? Like, why does it bother you so much? And I think, at least for me, I have to constantly remind myself that like, yes, the music industry is like laughably unfair, but at the same time, I'm like, do I want what that artist has? Really? Like, is it because do I want what that artist has, or do I want sustainability and to be able to pay my bills and have a family and take care of myself and my people? Is that what I want? And I think if I have what they have, I could do that. Right. How do I even know that's true? And that's something that I have to unpack a lot. And again, it's like, a lot of this is a cycle. It's like trying to take what people say about you with a grain of salt, and also like not directing it, like your anger and frustrations and things, on people that you don't know. I think growing as an artist has helped me do that a lot less. Like the bigger my project gets, the less I feel like I need to just like rip on somebody. So,
yeah. I mean, that makes total sense. Do you think like the having people not connect or want to sort of box you in, was that happening a lot when you were on Anjuna?
I got signed because I was making a lot of like rock music with Matt Zoe, and he took a couple of those songs and he remixed them, and that ended up on his album. And at the time, I did not understand what association did, or like, oh, if I go and like let's go spend some time, because the label itself, I never experienced something so just like tight knit. It's a very well run label. I didn't understand necessarily what that meant at the time, but I was like, oh, I can get vinyl and a cassette and I can tour. Like, I've always wanted to do that. Let's give it a shot. But I didn't know what that meant for like being plugged into a fan base that's over 20 years old.
Right.
And that grew up with these people. Like there's such a solid expectation because it's a whole community of people that grew together in this little bubble. But I think the labels signed me because they knew I was making a lot of different stuff and they wanted to see where it went. And they gave me a lot of support, especially because I was making a ton of music with people that have been with them since the beginning. I feel like that is why I got so much push, is like because I was songwriting for these like staples of the label. And at the same time, I realized like I'm getting like shoved into a very specific lane that I didn't necessarily ask for or want. And like, even like when you look at an artist page, it's like, or like you go to a song radio, and like, it doesn't direct you to songs from my album. It directs you to the radio show. Sorry, I'm getting off track.
No. It's to contextualize that for a second is just like, say you go to your Spotify and like, are you saying like maybe one of the top tracks is like a radio show that you're included in?
Yeah. And it's like, and I don't think people realize that cuts into what you like, your streaming payout is already bad. That cuts into it more. And people like, especially people who are passively listening, are going to keep going to that rather than being directed to your actual discography.
Right. And it makes what you're doing maybe seem a little less unique too, right? Like and
it kind of makes you feel disposable in a way, right, where it's like, especially for a project that big or a label that big that's putting out like 3 releases a week or multiple albums in a season, it can kind of mess with you. And again, I'm noticing even the people in the best possible position don't feel like they have their own identity. And they are feeling like they constantly have to put on for this culture that like they've probably already grown out of, or it's like it's causing them emotional distress. And I'm like, do I really want that for myself? I don't. I need to get out of here. I need to figure out how to get out of here. And so that's like especially after I'd put my album out and experiencing all of that and experiencing what like all of this judgment, despite just like, yo, I'm just putting out songs, dude. Like,
right.
If you hate it, cut it off. If you don't want to see me play, come after I play. Like it's not hard, but it's people feel entitled to you when you make it to that point. They feel entitled to what you're doing and your attention. And I don't think they realize they're talking to a person.
Right.
And I think even at the height of like me parting ways with them, I would like I remember I went to this show with Megan that she was playing, and people kept coming up to me, and I think they were expecting me to be mean to them or something. Like, and I was just like, hey man, what's up? Like, I'm going to greet you like a normal person, and I need you to understand that I am also a person. I'm a 30-year-old trying to figure this shit out. And that's it. And I realized I was in a place that I'm like, if I continue here, I am going to be in a place that I don't know if I can get out of. And I just don't want to find out. And I think it was not easy at the same time, like, I don't think I would have had, I wouldn't be in a position to be able to finish the work that I just did of like, oh no, this is for me. I'm able to find my own joy, whether I have something waiting for me or not. This is for me. And then whoever wants to listen, we can spend that time together. But it's not like, here, I made this project. Let's force feed it down all these people's throats, whether they like it or not. And then like getting yelled at for it, basically.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, like that experience, I think the bones of that experience are very universal in the industry too, where a young artist aspires to, get in with this label or this artist, or just to be part of the cool kids, whatever they think that is. And 99 times out of 100, if you're able to get in with that, it's not what you think. The results of it aren't what you pictured in one way or another. Right. And I think that feeling of, whether it's I can't be myself here, whether it's I'm not getting the attention here, whether it's, I can't grow here, whatever it is, that's a very universal thing. And I think an important lesson too is that not that these things can't be helpful, and not that these big communities, labels, whatever they are, can't be cool things and important things in the culture. It's, I don't know, pinning all of your hopes to them. And I guess I'm just talking about early me now too, but it's the same thing, that like, it's too simplistic of a view. It never works that way.
It's also outdated, really. Like,
that's probably true too.
The aspect of like, and I find this so interesting now, because like I signed where I did initially because I'm like, I want to be on Ninja Tune. I want to be a Ninja Tune artist and be like the coolest of the cool. And like, I noticed that you don't get signed to a label like that without a really, you got to have your own fan base. Like, things got to be locked in. Like, you really have to like have a very beefy infrastructure on your own. And I quickly realized, I'm like, where if I continue here, I might not see that, because everything I'm doing is tied to the identity of this label. And it actually made it harder to get gigs doing other things. I would have to like convince people, hey, I know, like, here, I'll send you a set. Like, I fit. Yeah, I think especially now where it's like people, as annoying as social media can be, you have more control over your narrative and what you share with people, and your growth. You can grow as much as you feel like. If you have the energy to keep putting stuff out there, like, you have more chances at striking the match, I guess, and finding your people. And something that I'm realizing now is I'm trying to return to this very like traditional band method of like, your tour schedule isn't decided because a label and an agent gave it to you. It's like, no, go hit the road, play these small gigs, spend time with people, like really be with people, develop the fan base first, and then agent, then label, not the other way around. Because I know so many electronic acts that like put an incredible amount of work, and if the team's not into it or doesn't care right now because they're focused on something else, like, you can't really do much about it.
Yeah,
so
it's universal. It happens so much more than I think people realize.
Yeah. And again, it's like, it's not something as difficult as last summer was for me to like make this massive adjustment and part ways with something that was like financially viable. I was pretty stable, but again, I was like, what am I compromising for that? And I want it to be this much healthier experience of like, not just kindness to each other, but like being really nice to yourself. And I want my fans to be able to like be comfortable with the process of self-exploration, wherever that might lead you. It's not always like a happy or fun place to be, but the more comfortable you get with doing it and allowing yourself to transform with that, the more fun and inviting and wholesome your experiences with other people and how you connect with other people. And that's something I want to focus more on. And it can be really hard to do that when everything you do is like overshadowed by like, well, what label is it coming out on? Who's co-signing it? Who cares about you? And
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Who cares about you is a thing people are oddly concerned about.
I mean, I get it because again, it goes back to like, oh, if this person cares about what I'm doing, then that means I have resources. I have resources to keep going. And
of course. And of course it's valuable. I mean, that's like if you're getting shine or put on by some larger entity, that's generally a good thing for a bigger person or larger entity to do. You want to, reach a hand out and help people coming in and all that. But yeah, it gets complicated.
Yeah. And I just don't, I don't think I need to get into any like more detail about my experience. It's like I think there's a very general understanding of like wanting things to like the things that you work for being your own, and whether it be failure or success, like being able to own that for yourself and having more control over what that looks like. If I flop, it's because of me and not anything else. I think self-releasing this next album is like, it's been so enlightening because it's like, oh, I'm not going to get nearly as much push. Like, I'm going to accept that. Fine.
Right.
But I get to go tap into steps of the process that I skipped because I had a team do it for me. And I get to interact with people that I skipped like talking to because I was having other people do it. Like now I get to be more involved with the process and see what it takes and what's necessary. And it makes you more respectful of of like marketing and how you campaign things. Cause it's one thing to just work on the art, but I think a lot of us struggle with like shifting gears into like the very selfish process of making music and switching into like the communal, immersive, and like wholesome aspect of like, okay, let's share it. Let's be together. Let's spend time together. Like, it's really hard to do that. Like, I have to catch myself where I'm like, you're not trying to just make people listen to you.
Right. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's almost like a farm to table thing where it's more about just the individual, like organic, which is an overused word, but those connections to real people who like what you do. I think a few of those is worth so much more than a lot of the kind of surface level interactions with when it's kind of just you part of a larger entity,
Yeah. Again, it's like going back to the sense of like having control and being able to curate what the experience is, which I think if there's anything I learned from the Odesza tour, it's like, just put in the time and make sure that you're aligning yourself with people that make you feel not just like appreciated, but safe, like genuinely safe to be vulnerable and push you to try your best and contribute your best. And you kind of like, it's this great thing where it's like you work on yourself and you have this like full cup, internally, and you kind of just nurture each other. And whether it be the crew that you're working with or your team or your fan base, I that's just something that I want to work towards slowly, even if it means not growing like the way I was. I just don't want that this time around. So
yeah. Well, I mean, it puts you much more in control of that growth, slow or fast, which I think at the end of the day is like, that's a great goal for any artist, is to be in control of your direction, which is hard to do when you're kind of on a bigger ride.
Yeah, it's literally not in your control. It's just not, a lot of things just aren't up to you, down to like, sometimes it's the artwork or again, like your tour schedule or like who remixes your songs or whatever. It's like not really what you have a say in. It's like, I feel like these things are important for the grand scheme of things. So
they really are. Absolutely. And look, we've been talking for a long time. I feel bad keeping you here this long. Can we just, in a few minutes, as quickly as you're able, the last thing I want to talk about is what we said we would talk about at the very beginning, which sort of, I think, connects these like early times with these right now times, which is your time in Vegas.
Oh, yeah. Vegas is where I cut my teeth and where I learned like how to be an artist, because there's so many people there that make their own merch, book their own tours, crowdfund to make an album. Like, it's such a go-getter local community, and being around it, again, it's like not competition. It just makes you hungry. It makes you excited to improve. And I got to open for so many different types of people, like Elderbrook or Neon Indian, Cocky King, like completely different worlds that I don't think I would have gotten anywhere else. And yeah, just to keep it short, despite like my habit of not speaking to people after I leave a place, the only friends that I truly stay in touch with are all the friends that I made in Vegas. Like it's just this mutual like respect and understanding. And again, it's like these people that really showed me really how to get after it and to not let people like tell you what you're allowed to do. And yeah, that can be to a fault sometimes, but it's like it's what made me so persistent and like being able to focus and finish projects and ideas that I care about very deeply. And I hope to move back. It's just so hot. It gets like 117 sometimes. And I'm like, I don't know.
It's getting
man.
worse and worse. Yeah. It's cool to hear though. I like that perspective because I think especially from the dance music side, people think of Vegas as like the pinnacle of commercialized EDM, which I mean, it is. And I'm sure that was happening in parallel to your experience there. But yeah. It's fun to think about the other side of it too, that doesn't really get talked about as much.
No, it's got an incredible arts district, the downtown area. Even though downtown's getting commercial too, I'm seeing so many acts play like at like We All Scream and Disco Pussy and Commonwealth that I did not see when I was living there. I think people are finally realizing that Vegas is a great place to kick it, and it's a worthy tour stop, and people just are down to get down, and it's so much fun. But yeah, I remember when I was living there and like I would hear people from LA talk shit about Vegas and I was like, shut up, dude.
Was it a little fun to also have the kind of big top EDM stuff going on there at the same time? It's
funny because like then like, you know, I would have friends from out of town or especially from Georgia come visit. They're like, can we go to the Strip? And you're just like, fine, man, I'll go take you to see Diplo.
Yeah.
And and what's funny is like when you live there, it's like, we're not paying for tables. We're going to ask a friend to get us in and walk us in. And we're going to have a nice spot to sit. And you are going to tip the fuck out of the waitress that is going to give you free drinks. Okay. You're going to give her all of your money, all of it. And like, but then like my friends who like, I think what's beautiful about Vegas is especially people that were born and raised there have a special like resistance. Their immune system to temptation is very strong. But then when I have friends from out of town visit, they lose their goddamn minds. Like they're just like, like, what do you mean we can pet a llama at 3 a.m.? And I'm like, yeah, and you can shoot a gun if you want. Like,
it's a lot of extremes. Yeah,
it's so extreme. But Vegas is fascinating because it's like, if you are in a bad emotional state, there's so much around you to spiral with and take you down even further. But if you have the right support system, it is one of the most phenomenal experiences that I think it like shaped who I am as a person. I think like a lot of what I know now, whether it be like just my consistency as an artist or just like being able to trust my skills on stage, any of that, like I really owe that to like church and playing in Vegas a ton. So, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I really like talking to you. This is a lot of fun. Is there anything we haven't talked about? Anything else you want to get out there before we wrap it up here?
I guess the date, the album comes out August 2nd. Okay. And that's pretty much it.
I'll make sure I'll plug that at the top of this too.
Yeah, that's the only thing. I feel like we covered a lot. Even stuff that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to feel like, I think we talked about things in the.
If you don't way. Later, I do edit this. We can take out anything you want. Not a problem.
But I think it's, again, it's like one thing to work on music by yourself and like going through this process alone. And then when you get to unpack things and where you're at in such a deep way with someone else, it's always like, oh, this is like really refreshing. So I appreciate you for giving me the time.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for doing it. I've been following what you do for a long time, so I'm really glad we got to do this.
That's really cool. Thank you. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I do have some show announcements coming up, but that's not till next week, so I guess I'll leave it off. Okay, perfect. Well, we'll direct them to all your socials, and we'll tell them where they can find you. No worries.
Yeah.
We should stay in touch, though. It was great talking to you.
Hell yeah. And I'm in DC, by the way, so I'm not too far from Philly.
Noted. That's great. Okay, perfect.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much again. This was great.
Absolutely. Anytime. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Peace.